Hello and welcome back to Katzer's classes. This is part 4 and it should pretty well round out our introduction tutorial series for new beginner crocheters. So if you have been following along parts 1, 2, 3, perfect. Here we are at part 4 and we are going to start to put all of those skills together. If you have not been following my series, of course that's fine, but you just should know that this is going to be going over reading a pattern, but I'm assuming that you know some of the basics of crochet. So I'll be explaining how to read the pattern and things like that, but I won't necessarily be explaining the individual stitches. I'm kind of operating with the assumption you know what those basic stitches are, and interpreting the pattern is going to be a new thing, but just doing the stitches themselves is something you can handle. If that is not where you're at, then you might want to go back and watch some of the earlier parts. Otherwise, let's put all those skills together and see what we can do. Alright, so I am starting us off here with a pattern of mine that I have written and released. So this is available for free, so by all means follow along with this video, or if you would like to actually download it yourself, I'll be linking that in the description. And so this is just a simple Pokeball. It's one of the quickest, easiest things that I make, and it seems like a good place to start. So yeah, you'll often have that kind of like title card, just like a photo title. And then we'll move on to the second kind of page of a pattern is often this little, I don't know, fluff. It's just, we're friendly, you know, we have things to say. So it's just a little bit of chit chat kind of talking about expectations of, again, like skill level, maybe, who knows, a story about how we came to make the pattern or like whatever. Not usually anything too critical, but you know, give it a read, it's fun. And then this is where patterns get truly useful. So typically before the actual like instructions line by line start, you've got just your kind of overall instructions. So this is going to tell you what you need to use, so the yarn you need, the hook you need, and if there are any extra tools you might want. So in this case there's a tapestry needle because there is a little bit of sewing involved with this pattern. You'll need something to fill it with. Some people might say you need safety eyes. So anything like that is what you can expect to see on this first page. And, you know, I've also specified like specifically what yarn I used. Sometimes you might even see yarn colors. Like it's all about if somebody wants to recreate the pattern is like exactly as they can to the original reference of the original artist. That could be useful. So I did use blanket yarn. Another interesting thing just to note as you're getting into patterns is that a lot of them are a little bit flexible. So just because, for example, I made this out of a weight 6 yarn, a bulky yarn, if you feel very strongly about using a different weight yarn, a lot of patterns actually translate okay. So if you were looking to recreate using this same pattern but using, let's say, a weight 4 yarn, in this case, you will actually still get a Pokeball in the end and it'll look pretty good. And I find that that's the case with a lot of things, and sometimes it's in reverse. If you see a pattern for a little plushie made out of weight 4 and you want it to be bigger and softer and fluffier, you can size up to blanket yarn and usually the patterns will work out just fine. Occasionally there are things that don't translate properly, so you do have to be a little bit cautious and know that if no one has specified that you can do that, you're taking a small risk, but in my experience, usually it works pretty well, so feel free to play around with it when you're trying out new patterns. And then underneath all of that is just a breakdown of all of the different stitches that are involved in this pattern. So this is a good place to double check. You know, everybody has their own idea of what constitutes a beginner pattern or an intermediate pattern, but by checking here at what is kind of expected in terms of stitches is a good way to check if you know all of them or not. And then if you don't, then you can just go and look it up and see if it's something that you're comfortable learning right now, or if maybe this pattern is a little bit outside of your skill range and you want to just save it and come back to it later. This is one of the best places to gauge that. And from there, you're straight into the pattern. So first off, it will often indicate if you are working in the round or if you are working in lines. This is important to know, although honestly, the pattern won't make a lot of sense if you're misinterpreting it for the most part. So the fact that you are starting off with a magic circle probably means you're working in the round. Oh, and I guess I should explain. So in addition to denoting which types of stitches you're using, it also explains how they are abbreviated in this pattern. Usually this is pretty standard, but in case, again, this may be your first pattern and so you're just being introduced to these abbreviations, or someone might have their own kind of naming conventions, you never know. So this is if you're working in the round. This pattern is worked in the round. Otherwise, it usually will just say row instead of round. Magic circle, single crochet, chain stitch, slip stitch, increase, repeat. So they're not trying to trick you here. They're literally just abbreviations of the word, or like an acronym of the two words, whatever. So it should be hopefully intuitive, but you will get the hang of it if not. And again, these are all the ones we are using in this pattern. So as I said, if you've been following along with this series, we have touched on all of these. If you're not familiar with them, then hey, this is what I'm saying. Now is your chance to go back, double check how they're done, and then meet us back here once you've done that. So yes, working in the round. And then just, there's a couple things that I might touch on here before we even pull out our yarn. So we have color changes marked. Sometimes it'll be ambiguous. It'll just say color A, color B, in case, you know, it doesn't matter what color you're using if you want to pick your own. So in this case, we're starting with the red yarn. And everything is broken down into rounds, or as I said, this is where you'd see it broken down into rows if you were working in rows. So every time you make like all the way back around, that's a new round, and we're just numbering them so we can keep track of what happens round to round. Your main instruction is going to follow that, that indication of which round you're in. And then at the end here is a really useful spot. This tells you the total number of stitches you should have in that round by the end of like completing the round. So I think we'll just start crocheting and kind of see as we go, and it should make some sense. But yeah, we'll dive right in here. Okay, so we have got our blanket yarn. It is a red color because we're doing a classic Pokeball, and this is my size 8mm hook, like the pattern recommended, and we're gonna get started. So that first round there is doing 6 single crochets into a magic circle. So we're gonna start off by making our magic circle, and we're gonna do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then you can see it says here at the end that we should have a total of 6. We just did exactly 6, so that's what we've got. Now, second round, we are just going straight into it. No need for a standing stitch or anything if that's not indicated. I personally will tend to do my second round before I actually close my magic ring, just because I think it's a little bit easier to work in when it's not already bunched up and tight. So the next one says increase times 6. So this kind of thing is often, if you're familiar with math or order of operations, it can be kind of like having something in brackets. So instead of just writing out increase 6 times, or you know, if you look down to round 3, single crochet and increase, instead of writing that out 6 times, we just multiply the instruction. So in this case, an increase, so we're gonna do 2 single crochet in this next stitch, and we're gonna do that 6 times all the way around. Alright, so now again we can see over here, this is our total number of stitches that should be in that round. And so if we have done all of it, it will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Oh, see, and this is why we have this. This is why we double check. It looks like I actually only did 5. So there's my 6th. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Beautiful. And at this point, I am going to close up the bottom of my magic ring. There we go. Beautiful. And then we can move on to round 3. So for round 3, this is kind of how I was comparing it to using brackets. That's typically, you'll see asterisks like this, or you might actually see parentheses, and this just indicates that this is kind of your unit of what is getting multiplied by 6. So it's not, you know, just for clarity, right? It's not 1 single crochet and then 6 increases. It is both of these together as a single instruction, and then that is times 6. So we're going to do a single crochet in the first stitch, and then we're going to do an increase in the next stitch, and we're going to repeat that. So as you get familiar with patterns, you are definitely going to start to see some sort of patterns appear in the way that they're written. Anytime you are looking to do well, most amigurumi that's kind of based on spheres, for example, you'll tend to notice this pattern that it's always going to be increasing. I'll see, I'm trying to talk and I'm getting distracted. Increasing in this way, where it's a single increase all around, and then we've got a single crochet and an increase, and then 2 single crochets and an increase, and then 3 single crochets and an increase. And it's kind of working up in multiples like that, so that you'll notice along the side we're always increasing by 6. Every round we are increasing by 6. And let me double check my count here. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 16, 17. I've got one more to do. And that's something that, you know, later on I plan to get into a bit more of a tutorial series about actually patterning, but that's mostly just about making a smooth curve, you know, getting the shape you want with that consistent addition of whatever number you started with. That just works out well, so you'll see it a lot. And then, so this is, I think, to increase by another 6, we're going to do a single crochet and a single crochet, and then our increase. And by doing this, you're always repeating this pattern, whatever it is that you need to do for that row, whether it's the 1 increase, single increase, single increase, you're always repeating the unit by 6. And that's typically because you'll see 1 increase each unit. Doing that 6 times will always gain you 6 new stitches each round. So let's finish up this round. Okay, and so that finishes round 4 and brings us to our next instruction here. So round 5 to 6. So if 2 or more rounds have the exact same instruction, they will often get abbreviated to just one line like this. So you need to count in your own head to kind of keep track of if you're done 1 round and then the 2nd round. And also when you see something like this where you're doing multiple rounds, that it's just single crocheting all the way around. You've got no increases, no decreases. We are staying at 24 stitches. We're just single crocheting all the way around the whole round. This is where you might see people start to use a stitch marker, which may or may not be mentioned in the tools of what you need. I personally don't always use stitch markers. Occasionally, so like if I'm doing you know, one of my really big life-size projects where I've got like 20 rounds before I have another increase or decrease instruction, then yes, I will use a stitch marker and not pay attention. But in a case like this, I might just keep track in my head, but whatever you are more comfortable doing, by all means, is a good idea. So we just mark off here. That's going to be the end of our round, or you're welcome to mark off this loop, and then you know that was the first one in your round. Again, whatever method works for you is good. So in this case, as instructed, we are just going to go all the way around, single crocheting in each of our 24 stitches twice. Okay, and so we've made it up to our stitch marker. So remember, that was our first stitch in the round. So now that it is the next stitch, we know that we have completed 1 full round. We're about to start our 2nd round, and you can absolutely just crochet right around the stitch marker. You do not need to move it every time. So here goes our 2nd round of single crocheting all around. Okay, and there we go. We are back at, you can see we've got, this is inside 1 and then a 2nd round, so that is 2 rounds completed since we put in our stitch marker. and we'll turn back to our pattern here. And this is where we do our shift to white yarn. Now, color change might be the one thing I actually have not touched on in previous videos. So we'll do this nice and slow. So I'll take out my stitch marker there because I've already done those 2 rows. I am done with what it was counting. And I'm going to grab my white yarn. So my favorite way to do a color change is actually to start in the stitch before. So this is our first stitch of our white round, but I'm actually going to undo this one loop. So we want to get to the point where in our previous stitch we have pulled our yarn through once, and this is now our yarn over step. And again, the previous stitch, the last stitch of the previous round. So at this point, I will use my white to pull through in my new color. And this just makes a little bit of a cleaner line when you're switching over. And now we start our first stitch in the round of, so round 7 according to the pattern. Our first round in white. And once you've done that little trick there with the previous stitch, everything is just going to be completely normal. We are just single crocheting around. Rows 7 and 8 are the same as 5 and 6, just in a new color. And the cool thing about working in a new color is that it basically serves as its own stitch marker. So it's really easy to count from this point. We just work all the way around until we get to the first stitch that is in white, and we know that we have done one complete round. There are some really good techniques out there for making clean lines when you do your color change. So if you look at this, we've got this zigzagging pattern just because that's how crochet looks, right? Each stitch makes this kind of zigzag. In this pattern, I don't think it's worth your time to do anything to make that line cleaner and straighter because we're going to be covering that up with the black seam that goes around a Pokeball anyways, but it is certainly something we can talk about in later videos. And we've made it all the way back around. So that is one round. I also think it's time to get rid of this red yarn. We are not going to need it again. So my favorite way to handle securing yarn when I do my color changes is just to snip that strand. We don't need the red anymore. And in the case of these two, I don't like weaving in ends. A lot of people don't. I'm one of them, and when you're working on something like amigurumi, it is so easy to hide the ends on the inside and it doesn't matter. So I like to just tie them in a simple knot first, just to make sure everything is really secure. And then you just pull them through. And again, this pattern is especially forgiving because even if you do see a little bit of that knot or anything, we are covering all of this up. So it's a great place to practice and easily hide your mistakes. I'm just going to grab that strand as well. Now everything is beautifully hidden on the inside, and we can continue on with round 8. So we're going to single crochet all the way around one more time. Okay, and again, it's its own stitch marker. You can see that we've made it all the way around to where we did our color change again. It is a little bit of a jog here. Again, there are techniques to help eliminate that we'll go over at a later time, or you can look up other people's solutions. But for a pattern like this, you won't see it because we're covering it up. And if it doesn't bother you, you can always have that at the back of a pattern. A lot of people just have a slight jog where they color change and it doesn't bother most people. So that's a personal preference. But in this pattern, again, we are covering it so it doesn't matter. And now we get to move on to round 9. So typically at this point in the pattern, especially if it's a sphere that you are making, everything from row 9 down is basically just reversing everything from 1 through 4. So it's that same notion of here we increased by 6 each round, we're going to start decreasing by 6 each round. So similar again with same notation, we kind of have that single crochet, single, and decrease. And again we go one single, and then through our next 2 stitches to do a decrease. And we do this all the way around. Okay, and then this is where you can start checking your numbers again. If everything has been correct up to this point, we should be down to 18 stitches. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. And like I said, it's just going to continue on just like before. So now we get to row 10, and we're going to do a single crochet and then a decrease. And then we've just got a little note here in the pattern between rounds 10 and 11. So this is a suggestion. It's not necessarily a hard rule of the pattern, but this is the point where I like to start stuffing my Pokeballs. You could leave it another round, it just means the hole is going to be that much smaller and a little bit of a pain to try and stuff. So this is a good time to do it. So at this point, polyfill is a great option. I use it frequently, and that's actually what I listed in the pattern for what you would need. In practical real life, I will often just use scraps of whatever other projects left behind, which is always a good option too. It's always a fine option, reduce waste. No need to throw anything out. You just use it as filling and nobody will ever know. Let's get just a little bit more in there, nice and full. Okay, perfect. And then this is where, it's a bit of a trade-off. So I like to stuff it at this point so it's not hard to get the stuffing in, but then you just need to realize that you are doing the last row of instructions with a full project, which can be a little bit more awkward to work with at times. So we were on round 11, which is just decreases all the way around. There we go. And we're just going to leave enough of a tail here. So this is the instruction we've got underneath round 11. We're going to leave enough of a tail that we can close off the final bit. So this can be done with a tapestry needle or with your hook sometimes. So the way I would do this with a crochet hook is just from wherever your tail starts, we're going to put our hook through the next stitch over and pull that yarn through, and we're just going to keep doing this. So the next stitch over, pull the yarn through, and you would want to do this all the way around for all 6 of your stitches. Or you can use the tapestry needle, and it's basically the exact same thing. You still want to be weaving that tail through each of the stitches all the way around back to the start. And once you've gone through each of those stitches with either technique, then you can just pull the whole thing closed, just like closing a magic circle. And from this point, it should be secure enough that you can just tuck this end inside. If you are the nervous sort, you can always tie your own little knot here, just like when you're sewing. And then just bring the tail. Oh. When you have polyfill, it's easy when it's full of, there we go, just pull it through and snip it from over here. And there we go. So that is the actual ball of the Pokeball, finished and done. You squish it a little bit to get that stuffing distribution how you want it. And you are most of the way done. In fact, you could even just throw eyes on it right now, call it a Voltorb, and be done. But no, we're doing a Pokeball today. So we are going to look at our next page of instructions, which is to start making that band. So now we are putting this off to the side and switching over to our black yarn. So this is done as a separate piece, and so we can see that we're starting over with round 1 again, because this is again a separate piece. So we start off with 8 single crochet in a magic circle. There we go. And this is probably a little bit unconventional, something you might not see in many patterns, but we are just doing this one round of everything in the magic circle itself. And then round 2 is just instructing us to make a whole bunch of chain stitches. That's it. That's the last step. Which again, a little bit unconventional probably. It's not exactly worked in the round, but you just follow the pattern at face value. Literally, we are just going to chain 28 times. And so we've got this circle with a big long chain, and we just have to notice that here there's an instruction to leave a very long tail. So this is almost kind of like the full length of what we've made all the way back. This is how much tail we're going to need. Snip. And that is it for the black yarn. This is, just pull that through. And this is our band piece. And then our final section here instructs us to go back to working with white. This is the button for the center of the Pokeball, the button you press to release your sweet Pokemon. And there is only one round here, and it is 3 in a magic circle. So that's nice and easy. We can do that real fast. Or, take your time if you're still working on magic rings. No worries. So that's 1, 2, 3, and that is it. That is the entire thing. Close that up. And again, we were instructed to leave a bit of a tail. So we'll give like that much. I don't actually measure all that often, but that seems about like 5 or 10, whatever. A little bit of extra doesn't hurt. Gives you that cushioning. All right, and so now with that, we have all of our pieces done, and it is time to assemble. So we're starting with the tail of the button, so that's this that we just left, and we're going to sew it onto the magic circle section of the middle band. So that's this. Here I definitely do recommend using the tapestry needle. Makes things a whole lot easier. So we're going to thread on the tail that we left. And part of what I like about this pattern is that it's fairly simple. You're only using some of these basic stitches, but you're also getting a bit of practice with sewing as well. If you have ever done hand sewing before, that will help. If you haven't, it's just a matter of going back and forth through your stitches, coming out on the back, and getting everything down just as nice and tight as you can. Oop, that's just where I was. The smoother you can get this finished look, I would say the better your finished Pokeball is gonna look. So we want to try and get all the way around to all the edges. There we go, all the way around. And at this point, I'm actually going to thread this side onto my needle as well. And I'm just going to sew through with that one too. Beautiful. Getting it as centered as possible. Mine is just a little bit off center, but that doesn't bother me much. It's crochet. It doesn't look perfect in the end. It's a little bit iffy, and that's fine. And then our, I think, last instruction here is we're going to thread the tapestry needle onto the tail of the middle band. So now we're going over to this big long tail that we left. This is where we are threading our tapestry needle. And we're going to sew the entire band around our Pokeball. Remember how I said we're going to cover this up? This is how we're doing it. So we want to have the circle positioned right over that color change, just because it's the widest section, and so it's the easiest way to bridge that little bit of diagonal, that jig, jag, zag, that zag. And we're going to, all the way around, just be covering up the seam with this big long chain stitches. So, seems like we'll be starting right about here. And we'll start, from the side where the tail is attached. And we're just going to sew all the way around. Again, it's a little bit trickier because this is already a stuffed 3D shape. It's not like this where we can actually go through to the back, but it's just a matter of lining it up to cover that color change, and then in one stitch, out the next. Blanket yarn is nice and bulky and fluffy, so it's really good for something like this, again, covering this change. If you do choose to do this with a weight 4 yarn, you might have a little bit of a harder time really fully covering it, but that's all part of the process. Learning and experimenting. There we go. Now that we've made it all the way back around to the magic circle. Oh, I got stuck on some of my stuffing. There we go. Now we just have to make sure that we get this stitched down nice and well all around its outside edges. And these tails here we're going to hide inside the ball just like everything else, so you can do this at whatever step is most convenient. Now they feel in my way, so I'm going to go ahead and tuck them in. Beautiful. And our last couple stitches around. And voila! So as before, we're just going to tuck this tail back inside. And then trim that extra. And you have yourself a Pokeball. So there you go, Pokeball. That's about all there is to it. So most patterns are going to follow along these kind of just the general setup of everything we went over here today. And certainly my patterns are always going to look quite a bit like this. So if you want to use my patterns in the future, this is exactly the style they will be. And yeah, so there is your Pokeball. I don't know. I don't have much else to say other than I hope this worked for you and I hope everything made sense. If anything didn't, feel free to ask about it. I will definitely clarify anything in the comments if I get questions. And that, as far as I'm kind of thinking it through, should pretty much conclude everything you need to know to just get going with crochet, right? Once you've covered the basic stitches, you know how to read the patterns. Now, there are tons of beginner-friendly patterns out there, and I think you could take on any of them. So I'm sure at some point I will start making other short videos going over certain techniques or styles or, tips and tricks. Maybe we talk about color changes again one of these times. But in the meantime, you are ready and you have graduated from Katzer's classes, and I'm so excited for you to go out and try all the different things that you would love to make. And I will see you in the next one. Happy crocheting!